Assalamu alaikum, comrades. Today I am here with a story and a document. You see, much of what I do involves a lot of research, and a lot of the sources that I use aren't common because I like to view things through the Soviet perspective. And one of my favorite people to get insight from in English is Anna Louise Strong. And I talk much about her on all of my social media. And my goal in life really is to have every single book of hers, which she's written over 30 of. She's also contributed to teaching the general American public about the Soviet Union through many, many articles in various publications, magazines, journals, so on and so forth. And tracking them all down is kind of difficult. I was recently reading a book that mentioned an article of hers where she talks about being a Soviet wife. She married a man named Joel Shubin, a Soviet Jew, who's actually done a lot of interesting things. He even represented the Soviet Union in the World's Fair in the 30s. I forget which year. I'll show it here. In New York. But he did a lot of interesting stuff. Anyway, she married him. And 2 years after that, she wrote an article called We Soviet Wives, which was only published in a journal called The American Mercury. In a fit of frustration, I could not find anyone who had scanned or preserved this document, but I found one seller online selling the entire thing for $12, and I bought it in a fit of anger, because why is it so inaccessible? Why can't we access positive perspectives or rare perspectives of Soviet life from the 1930s? Why does it have to be so hard? Why do we gatekeep these things? Why are they behind paywalls? It's not okay. So I'm reading this book and someone mentions an article from Anna Louise Strong I've never read before called We Soviet Wives from 1934, which seems super fascinating, but I've never seen this anywhere. I did a quick Google search, could not find it published individually. So I go to notes from the pages, and I find that it is right here, We Soviet Wives in American Mercury, August 1934, page 415 to 23. That's not available in a PDF anywhere online, and there's no easy access to it that exists. So I had to find another way. I found one seller online who's selling it at a decent price. And here's We Soviet Wives, right, by Anna Louise Strong, along with a bunch of other works that I don't really care about right now. I just want to read this one, just this one. And the only way to access it is to physically buy it, because I don't have access to any archive that carries it. I checked the one at the University of Washington to see if they had it, and yeah, no. And I absolutely just spent $12 purchasing this so no one else can have it. I'm just kidding. I will absolutely make that information available to you when I have it, unlike other people have the past almost 100 years. Anyways, academia, it's not accessible. This is too much work just for me to read something that was published publicly, but you can't access it for free. I just want to know what Anna Louise Strong had to say. Newly married Anna Louise Strong to a Soviet. What did she have to say about being a Soviet wife? Tell me, Anna. An acquaintance of mine later pointed out that you can indeed read it on the Internet Archive, at least half of it for free. But I found that out after I spent the $12. So, hey, it arrived, and now I have this booklet from 1934. So let's talk about We Soviet Wives. Now, the article in here is about 9 pages long, so it's quite a long thing to read, but I already read through it, and I'd like to point out some interesting anecdotes that Anna Louise had to share about being a Soviet wife and the Soviet perspective of gender roles, or lack thereof, in a marriage and what that means, and some very interesting stories that she chooses to include, some that might shock you. So let's get into it. Now, first off, in case you don't know and you're new here, Anna Louise Strong is an American journalist from Seattle, Washington, who lived in the Soviet Union for about 30 years, living half of her time there, half of the time in the US, to keep perspective with both societies. She was also the first woman elected on the Seattle City School Board and then ousted for her support for the IWW. She helped incite the massive labor strike of 1919 in Seattle. She was close personal friends with Mao. She may or may not have slept with Trotsky. That's debated. She's lived an interesting life. She's a wonderful woman. And she was one of the few voices at the time trying to help Americans understand the Soviet Union. One of the few positive voices. So let's start. I hope you don't mind me reading to you. On my recent lecture tour in America, chancing to dine at the home of an old acquaintance, I remarked towards the end of our meal that I had been, for 2 years, married in Moscow. There was a sudden, polite accession of interest, a turning towards me as if I had somehow become different. All the others present asked, "Why didn't you tell us? And what is your new name?" "I didn't tell you because it had no connection with the discussion of the evening," I answered. "My name and work remain unchanged." At this, there were knowing smiles. "Ah, one of those Soviet marriages. Not permanently serious," was the comment. "Quite serious," was my rather annoyed response, "and gives every indication of permanence." But beyond this, I did not try to explain. What was the use? The complete removal of property and religious encumbrances and of sex inequality from marriage has made our Soviet Union somehow different from that which counts as proper wedlock. In most homes of the capitalist world, the enemies who charge us with frivolous promiscuity and those would-be friends who hail us as the world's new Puritans are almost equally annoying in their lack of comprehension. We ourselves feel that marriage with us has entered a new stage of development, foreshadowed by some of the friendlier companionships of America, but not widely attainable under capitalism. In another American city, a woman friend pried for some hours with that cheerful indiscretion which so many American women use in talking of husbands into what we in the Soviet Union would call my personal life. I trust I answered politely, but I think she got little information. Later, in discussing a certain admirable human quality, I remarked that my husband possessed it. "Why, I believe you like your husband," she said in amazement. And I realized that what to me was normal reticence indicated to her an abyss too deep for discussion. This time I was really annoyed. "Why on earth should I keep on living with him if I don't like him?" I answered, but her comment set me to wondering why this woman continued to live with her husband. She made it so plain to casual strangers that she had only contempt for his essential quality, a non-grasping kindliness which hinders money-making under capitalism, but which helps to an agreeable companion. To dine at her home was to be embarrassed by undisguised acrimony in table discussion, beginning with her injured attitude toward an unprofitable husband and extending to involve the time and cash-consuming children. What force of tradition, what economic pressure kept her enduring day after day those disagreeable dinners? So Anna Louise definitely talks from a place of I'm better than you, the Soviet Union is better than you, the way we do things is better, but you have to hand it to her. What she says is quite agreeable. Now, here she talks about what it means to be a wife in the Soviet Union and how it differs from what's expected in the United States. She says, "Not by her place as a wife may a Soviet woman win honor. Not even the wives of the greatest men live by reflected glory. Official honor shown to their husbands is never shown to them. If diplomatic receptions are sometimes graced by their presence, it is but a concession to the foreign ways of diplomats. When Stalin's wife died, the black-bordered condolences in the newspaper gave her own name and work, and only secondarily mentioned that she was a, quote, the close companion and comrade, end quote, of Stalin. Kalinin's wife has won recognition by creating a state farm and center of culture in the Altai Mountains. Marriage in the Soviet Union may be a source of happiness, but it is never the source of a career. Careers, renown and honor, we Russian women win as citizens, and not as wives. Homemaking, which has become a real profession in America, with many magazines devoted to its intricacies, is with us a part-time task and very little honored. Our Soviet women are perhaps too careless of its details. The average Soviet home has its furniture stuck anywhere, Color schemes are non-existent, and the daily chores of the house are done by both wife and husband. Such color and art and music as we have, and we have much, are used to ornament our public buildings, our parks of culture and rest, our justly famous theaters, our factory clubs. This is the aspect of our life that wears most heavily on those few American women who come to the USSR with their engineer or worker husbands to take part in our new industrial life. The man may find vivid interest in his labors, but the women grow rapidly homesick. The trade they have always clothed with sentimental honor, making a pleasant home for her husband, has no recognition here. The industrial plant where her husband works often regards her as a nuisance. These women who bother our offices and think they are somebody because their husbands are useful men. Why, not even Stalin's wife is a somebody, said the head of the Foreign Bureau in a big steel plant to me, adding, parasites, just parasites. Draining our food and goods and making no return for them, just clogging the time of valuable working man. In the end, such women either get jobs for themselves and become reasonably happy, or tearfully drag their husbands back to the homes of America. I hope you can't hear the construction. It's quite loud. I'll be right back. Now, Anna will go on to mention all the many things that women have achieved that is far better than being simply a wife or a homemaker. It gets great. It gets pretty good. If we lack all chance of honor as wives and homemakers, we have, on the contrary, every honor open to us that is open to any man, through our labor as citizens. You meet our women scattered throughout the length and breadth of the Soviet land, presidents of villages and collective farms, chairmen of shop committees, directors of factories, judges of people courts, doctors and engineers. There is not the slightest trace of sex discrimination in work. Schools and universities take women with equal readiness. They enter all jobs and professions receiving equal pay for equal labor. Now, mind you, this is in 1934. Think about the role of women in the United States in 1934. No less than 100 women have won the Order of the Red Star, given for high attainment in the armed forces of the country. Armed forces in the 1930s. I've read books in the past that have claimed that women weren't allowed to be a part of the armed forces until World War II, which is false, but it's just, here's another instance where that is clearly not the case, and you can see that through records of medals and awards given. Many hundreds have won civilian honors, the Order of Lenin, the Order of the Red Banner. 6,000 women are presidents of collective farms. 100,000 are elected members of courts. 400,000 are members of local governing Soviets. In the medical colleges, 71.4% of students are women, foreshadowing perhaps a day when most of our physicians will be of the nursing sex, in quotations. Women stormed the Arctic. Irene Rusanova was our first woman polar explorer. She wintered 4 seasons in frozen seas and made the first northwest-northeast passage around Asia in the famous Siberiakov. Nina Demi has managed for 2 years the polar station on Northland. One meets Russian woman geologist on the roof of the world. A woman bore her child in the Arctic-bound Chelyuskin. The independence of women, which in most of the world is a slow growth resulting from industrial revolution, is with us incredibly rapid as our industrialization is rapid. Even our farms, last strongholds of the patriarchal household, have in 5 years been combined into great collective farms on a mechanized, industrialized base, in which women's labor is paid equally with that of their husbands. Peasant women, last of all to feel the new women's equality under the Soviets, are suddenly awakening to the implications of their independent income. Now, here's an interesting anecdote. 2 women, members of a collective farm, were displaying their purchases in the town market. I asked them, "Well, how's your life?" The first one waved her new shawl and pointed to her shoes in token, adding, "And a new suit for my husband, and new clothes for the children." "And what did you buy for your husband?" I asked the second. "Nothing at all. I gave him 80 rubles from the family income to buy himself a suit, but he drank it up and now he gets no more. I got for myself a warm new coat, a dress and shoes. I got for the children clothes, but my man gets no new suit this year. And I've furthermore told him that if he gets drunk again, I'll throw him out of the house. I can get along without him now in the collective farm." Some 30 million women in peasant homes from Leningrad to Vladivostok are awakening to the amazing fact that they can get along without their husbands through the organization of the new collective farm. Equality and independence for women threatens man's last stronghold. The old-style home, the male-dominated patriarchal home, is really doomed. It is perhaps this that the moralists of the non-Soviet lands resent most. Wow. She then goes on to give quite a few examples of what these new Soviet romances look like. A lot of them aren't necessarily the best sounding in today's overworked capitalist society, because it does focus very heavily on couples overworking themselves to the point where they don't see each other option, and it's being seen as an honor in the 1930s in the Soviet Union, because they are building for the future. So the context is quite different. But one story stuck out to me that was supposed to show how the expectations of men and women have changed, and it may shock you. Basically, she mentions this man who has to work in a very faraway city from his wife and children, and he does so happily, knowing that he will be able to move them. He earns himself an apartment in Moscow and is ready to move them over, and they refuse, his wife suddenly deciding to leave him, which is fine. Marriages in the Soviet Union were supposed to be easy to enter, easy to leave, without complications and not really needing reason. It just has to be like, we both agree we shouldn't be together. He wouldn't accept this, and he went a bit crazy, hysterical, as they say. But let me read you his story, because wow, I can't get over this. Trigger warning, there is mentioning of self-unaliving. A rising young teacher of my acquaintance came to Moscow, leaving his wife and children in temporary residence on the Volga, in his wife's hometown. For the sake of his family, he sacrificed the opportunities offered him for a wider study and toiled long hours at a routine job to send them money. 2 years of such lonely slaving won him a place of residence in Moscow. His wife, however, refused to join him or let the children go without her. The man's hysterical despair over his abandonment by his family recalls the more sentimental moments of Victorian fiction, in which, however, the despair was usually reserved for the softer sex. Woman, right? Night after night he sobbed. He contemplated suicide. Most serious in Soviet eyes, he actually stayed away from his job 2 days without a doctor's certificate. He called one night on an older woman who had known his family for years. She sharply reproved his weakness. "I am amazed," she said, "that an experienced social worker and a man of culture should let himself be so broken by a personal loss. You disgracefully talk of suicide as if there were nothing left in life. Consider all we have to do in education for the second 5-year plan." I'm sorry, just imagine today trying to console someone who has lost their family and wants to end it all, and you're convincing them to not for the second 5-year plan. Oh, but it gets better. Strange as it may seem to an outsider, this was the proper and effective method of consolation. The man's hysteria passed. He gasped through drying tears. "Yes, truly, I do wish to see how the second 5-year plan comes out." Nor would any Soviet citizen find anything surprising in his reaction. Subhanallah, Stalin's 5-year plan saved this man's life. I wouldn't use this as like a common anecdote to express Soviet life in the 30s. While it does in an extreme way show how people were willing to sacrifice a lot to put in effort towards the promised future, and at this time things were looking so wonderful towards the future. There's unmatched potential and pride and spirit in Soviet history from this time period. It's just, did they get everything that was promised? Did things all work out? Not necessarily, but the atmosphere is definitely something to imagine. And now I'll read you the concluding paragraphs that also express this sentiment in working hard for the promised future and how much people were willing to give up. For we are the worker bees of a working hive, the drone whose end of life is copulation. How do you pronounce that? I sound ridiculous because I don't know how to say some of these things. I know what it is, I just never say it out loud, Not one of those words. Is an object of our stings. Our dreams are for great farms and factories. Our passions for overfulfilled programs. Our beatific vision of man's marching conquest of his world. Sexual life is a campfire which lights and warms the halts along this march. If you should ask us whether we are personally happy, we should say that we have forgotten to inquire and have not time to know, for our whole life faces outward, and our thrill for each new gain of science, each new airplane through the Arctic, each new conquest of malarial marshes is no mean thing. Is there anything we miss lacking in emphasis on heights and depths of personal life? When we think of it all, we recall that the noted American alienist Dr. Frank Wood Williams traced most of America's neurosis to her hothouse homes. We note that psychoanalysis find in the grasping possessive male or mother a source of mental ills. We note that neurosis and psychosis are lessening in our country, and our healthier, non-possessive intercourse, our outward-looking absorption. There are those of us who hold the great personal ecstasies like their religious counterparts are products of starved nerves. Yet one of our oldest Bolsheviks said some years ago to me, a quote from this man, "Our pre-war generation fought in terms of right and justice. This hard new generation fights in terms of tractors and toothbrushes. For me, the ultimate reality will always be the human soul, but we shall not come back to that for another 50 years. This generation and the next have the planning and building of the mechanism. It must and should absorb them. Our children's children will have time to explore the deeper world within." Mind you, this is in 1934. She said a few years prior, so maybe 1930, 1932. And after this old Bolshevik's quote, Anna leaves us with this. Will they? Or were the speaker's words heretical? They would be judged so by the Soviet generation of today. Of one thing we feel certain, whether our way of life and love is the new healthy way for future generations, or but a temporary revolt against the grasping property loves of the past. To be someday swallowed in a new synthesis of richer personal and social life, there is on earth no happier, sounder path in this age. Isn't that interesting? Now, I just picked out some selected passages from this 9-page write-up, but it is very interesting to hear about this perspective. Anna Louise Strong was wonderful at translating the Soviet way of life and Soviet thought of the time. In fact, I wonder why she was allowed to write this here. I was looking at this particular journal, the American Mercury, which I don't have much background on. I've not read this particular journal in the past, but in the top corner it says NRA. Like, I don't know if it's funded by or distributed by the NRA, but that's interesting. And I wonder if they never read what she wrote. They just saw, oh, this woman is writing about marriage, I'm sure it's fine, and then published it. Did she ever write in it again? I don't have that answer, but it's interesting because I have a feeling that they did not either read what she wrote before it was published or considered her a threat based on her gender. As she points out, the differences between the expectation of women in the United States in the 1930s compared to the Soviet Union, where she is equal to man and working just as hard. So, what do you think, comrades? I hope me just reading to you wasn't too boring. I personally find everything that I read so fascinating, and I hope you did too. So please let me know in the comments what you think of this article, We Soviet Wives, from 1934. It really shows the sacrifices that people were willing to make at this time. But it is interesting looking back, knowing what would then happen, and if that sacrifice was worth it or not. That can be discussed at a different time. Anyways, please be inspired by history. Links to all my socials and ways to support me are down below. Thank you so much for watching me and listening to me today. Have a great day, comrades.